Hi everybody, I'm Colin. So I am pleased to be sharing the front in this room with my good colleagues here. We've been working together on this, well, with these two, well, with Andrew for probably 3 years and Lizah for about 6 months. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, going to situate the two pieces of research that they're co-leading. And in this kind of wider body of work, I've been working on this topic for probably just under a decade with a bunch of different projects and people. Broader context, we're in a lot of trouble. Humanity's facing multiple internet-connected crises, and that there's a recognition that we need to move and really think about how to transform society so that we can thrive and survive and be resilient, right? So agroecology is posited as a paradigm for which to do that in food systems, to transform food systems. Very quickly, agroecology has been around for quite a while. It started in academia as an understanding of the application of ecological concepts and principles to the design and management of sustainable agroecosystems. So really focusing on the farm level and agroecosystems and farming practices. Over time, it's evolved in lots of different ways. One, it's moved from the farming systems to think about food systems as a whole. And so it's shifted in that way. It's thinking more about principles of research, how principles can be enacted in different places to achieve outcomes, multifunctional outcomes. And then more fundamentally, it's evolved in the last kind of decade, is linked with the notion of food sovereignty, thinking about governance and how, not just thinking about food systems and the practices and how they're organized, but how the broader systems of governance and power shape and create the conditions through which agroecology can either survive or be undermined. What are the enabling conditions for agroecology? What are the disabling conditions that come from the political economy and cultures and things like this? So people talk about agroecology as a science, practice, and movement. There's also this political and policies and institutions dynamic that people are thinking a lot about. There's growing evidence about agroecology's multifunctional contributions. A lot of the principles were derived from practices and the study of practices, and that's evolved, and there's been these meta studies looking at agroecological practices and the outcomes showing a lot of benefit, and there's more work being done on this. And so agroecology showing up more in the lives of farmers and peasants and indigenous people in different parts of the world. It's being taken up by multilateral institutions, funders, social movements, NGOs. There are institutes at universities being started on focusing on agroecology, for example. And there's a lot of questions about how agroecology gets institutionalized and what that looks like. Academic work, there's a huge boom in academic work on agroecology. That's where we sit, the intersection of all of these things. So the idea is that agroecology, again, has this potential as a transformative paradigm to really address the root causes if you take this transformative approach to thinking about agroecology and think about it deeply and broadly. But what we're looking at is that mainstream institutions, the dominant regime, generally is locking in an industrial kind of extractive approach to agriculture and food systems. And particularly, we're looking here at agricultural development and climate, biodiversity finance, and how it largely is allocated towards supporting a different vision and different approach to food systems than agroecology represents. So this is where we're going to get you all to interact with us a little bit here. Okay, so there's within the agroecology movement and thinking, there's these two simultaneously held views. Okay, one is that kind of the apparatus for financing through philanthrocapitalism and state funding logics are themselves the problem, and that the system is fundamentally broken and that it is not all that useful to spend a lot of time engaging with that. On the other hand, there's the view that we need to dramatically shift and better use the existing systems to open up more space for transformation. These are held simultaneously within the movement and often come into debates about theories of change and strategies and so forth. So I'm gonna ask you all to, should we do the standing or should we do the sitting? Standing. Okay, everybody can please stand up. And if you have a drink, don't knock it over. So you can take a position on this, that's your own, or you can play the devil's advocate and move to a spot that you don't hold. No judgment on where you stand. But we want to have everybody who, so this This was a emoticon I could find, which is like, oh, really, do they think that? But I was actually thinking, I was trying to find one where someone put their hand on their head, because I was thinking it'd be hard to move around. And this one was supposed to be arms crossed, but whatever, we're gonna, instead, if you think that engaging with the system and is again, we need to do that to open up space, kind of move over onto that side of the room. If you think that the system is fundamentally broken, move over onto this side of the room. Or if you just want to like take one of those positions for the sake of arguing for them, you can do that too. So I'm gonna get everybody to move, and then I'm gonna call in a couple of people just to say where they are again, or ask for volunteers first. That's what I'm gonna do. Instead of calling. I'm sure there's somebody who feels really strongly about this in this room, and hopefully they'll jump in. So take a minute, move around. Yeah.
What if you hold both of them?
If you hold both of them, stand in the middle. Yeah.
I mean, how dramatic is dramatic? I mean, radical.
You stand in the spot where you want to ask and make that question, and then we'll try it. So move about again. No pressure or anything. We're just gonna use this as a way to get our blood flowing and start a conversation. So on this side, we've got to use the state funding mechanisms to make the change. This side is those are broken.
This is broken. This is.
Oh, thank you.
Wait,
This side is broken. Yeah. Broken? Gotta use it.
Okay.
Broken teeth down.
In the middle. All right. Bring your attention up here for a minute, and sorry to the folks online that we can't have you silence everyone, please. The people online aren't able to move. If you feel like it, you can either cross your arms or go like this, whatever you feel like. So curious, does anybody feel like they want to offer up something into the void here? Okay, starting here, and then there, and then there.
I'm sort of in the middle, but I think I have difficulty with the better use of state and philanthropic investment, and I think you're using the term philanthrocapitalism, and I see problems with philanthropy and neoliberalism taking away from state abilities to deal with problems. So I'd like to maybe see more dramatic shifts and better use of state and less philanthropy and like taxation that's adequate and fair.
Nice, thank you. Nice one.
And so I'm going to actually strongly defend that side, in that, following the COP, Conference of the Parties on Biodiversity, the GEF had a statement saying, we really got $250 billion towards addressing these problems, and we got to make sure it's tailored to venture capitalists, which is just the most perverse approach. So I'm very much leaning into the dramatic or radical there. And I think there are possibilities, but but in general, I mean, I think it's just completely broken right now.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
So similar to what Josh was saying, I think, making better use of the state system. We also have to understand which state we're talking about. Many of us thinking about the US state, but there might be differences, and that's important across the world. So, and where some states or people have better control over their states, that we don't need to necessarily say it's completely broken or.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Just the back.
I'm over here provocatively, in part because I see so many people around me, including, the university, try so hard to do the dramatic shifts and better use of state and philanthropic investment, but like just tailor their projects and research programs and everything to the desires of funders continually. And it's just like such a de-radicalizing process.
Thank you. Okay, two more.
I'll come over here.
All right.
So I wouldn't have taken my job unless I didn't think on the right. I work for the federal government. That's what I'm hoping that we can do in this position. it's still unclear to me whether we can and how we can, but I think there is so much money and like taxation, the power to tax and the power to put that taxation towards the public good. I think that is required for transformation.
Nice, thank you. Anyone else?
I think all of the funding is funding with money, and money is a claim on resources. And at this point, with the amount of debt we have a larger claim on resources than the resources we have in the world. And so if we keep using that money, at some point that runs into the reality that those resources don't actually exist. And so even as creative as you get in it, as much as if you have the notion at the bottom that you have ownership of resources and you're allowed to do whatever you want with them if you own them, and money is the enabling factor to do that, then there's some point at which that model can't do anything that respects those resources.
Thank you, everybody. Feel free to take a seat. I love this. There's so many good points and kind of deeper issues being raised, because part of it is, this project started in a number of ways, but one of the things were people wanting funders to, you could just do things a little bit differently, then we can make some change. But once you zoom in and out, you realize there's so much going on, what Matt was saying the other day, we got to talk about money. What is money? How is money shaping our lives? We got to talk about capitalism. We got to talk about neoliberalism. We got to talk about colonialism. All of these things, and it's important to zoom in and focus on the more pragmatic issues. And so the work that we're sharing is kind of trying to do that while also kind of zooming in and out. Here we are zooming in and out in this presentation. You'll see that. So this. And financing or resourcing agroecology, some of the biggest investors in agroecology are smallholder farmers and their labor and their land that's put into productive use and reproductive use for agroecology. But there's also this huge emphasis on thinking about, okay, agroecology is a thing. How can we shift state and other resources to make it thrive? So for me, this started far before this, but the first project we worked on was with CIPSE, which is an NGO, who were trying to influence the way FAO, and the European Union funded agroecology. It's part of this broader earlier work that was done to evaluate the portfolios of different funders and to evaluate to what extent they support agroecology or not. And the thinking about the methodology for that has evolved quite a bit. Andrew's going to talk about that. But we're also engaged in these broader communities of practice around funding, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food we're connected to, the McKnight Foundation, this work that Lizah is going to talk about with Friends of the Earth and the Banking Information Center on multilateral development banks. And so there's a lot going on in that space, and still it's only like a drop in the bucket of the questions that we need to ask. And so what we're going to do now is turn it over to Andrew first. He's going to talk about this kind of longer standing work that emerged from that, 7 years ago, this work with this NGO, CIPSE, when I was at Coventry University, the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. And then you're going to hand it over to Lizah, who's going to talk about this recent work, which is more in progress and just emerging. So, thanks.
All right. Thanks everybody for having us here at the Gund Institute. It's a real treat. Coming from Jeffords, and also I want to ask your forgiveness because I have to leave at 12:45. If somebody could actually hold up their hand around 12:30, that would be super helpful. Oh, there's a clock up there. But a hand in my face would actually be more helpful. So I'm gonna go really fast through this, and maybe what I'm doing is mostly just flashing resources in front of you that you can make a mental note of if you want to follow up on some of these, or just email us. We're definitely willing to have an open conversation about this stuff as we proceed. So we're kind of in this camp, this question about not so much what are the principles of agroecology or what are the virtues that we should follow, but we're kind of thinking more on the ground, how do we start pushing this rock up the hill in terms of bringing agroecology into this paradigm into full fruition, right? And so as Colin mentioned, we're kind of that's a very, very big question, and we're kind of really focused on financing patterns or financing practices within the funder community. And the funder community is diverse, right? It's governments, development agencies, it's small little foundations, big philanthropic jerks. and everything in between. So this is our kind of like, if you think about like the objectives of this research, this is one of the objectives, which is to create just the flow of money, the amount of money going into it. And a lot of this research started kind of in this neck of the woods. And so you have this report by Nina and with support in this project that Colin mentioned at CIDSE about EU disbursements to FAO, IFAD, and WFP, which are all these UN agencies that are potentially funding agroecology. And they use, so their method of this is kind of using this system. So they're looking across these projects and thinking, where can they fit these projects within this? These are the Gleesman levels of agroecology. I know a lot of you have probably seen these before. And even Gleesman kind of admits it's like the stuff down here is kind of headed towards agroecology, but not really agroecology. And this is where we get up into this like sort of transformational section where we're changing systems or system designs, things of that nature. So they're using this as sort of their categorization framework for looking at these projects. And basically they're saying that efficiency improvements are actually just still conventional agriculture. They're just making it kind of greenwashing it or making it a little bit more palatable. This input substitution with organic inputs or agroecological inputs is sort of an intermediate step, but you don't really hit agroecology until level 3, and then you start getting system change down in this section here. And this is a little small detail, but they split out some things that are technically conventional agriculture, but because of the way that they're empowering smallholders or local communities, we can also kind of consider them somewhat intermediate. This would be things like farmer field schools, participatory seed systems, stuff like that. And then governance, like food system governance organizations when they're funding those. So they wanted to kind of suss those out a little bit as well. And what you see is probably not a surprise. Again, this is 2016 to 2018. We get up to level 2, which again is an intermediate step, but not technically agroecology, and we don't have any real funding for agroecology based on that definition that they use. And this is, again, just the same thing, but by investments. I'm not going to spend too much time with that. This is the Global Climate Fund, or the Green Climate Fund. And I'm not going to spend time. So anyway, what happens is you get a lot of these reports, right, that follow after this. A lot of people doing the same analysis on different project portfolios. And then they kind of take a step back and they're like, wait, is this levels thing a really good sort of framework for this? So they turn to this HLPE principles, these 13 principles, and now they have a better tool, a more detailed tool that Amaya is really familiar with, looking at project portfolios based on these things too. So they can get a more specific, precise assessment, and this is a good study kind of describing that tool on whether something's agroecological and how agroecological that thing is. Not only these, but they also have red flags. So there are certain red flags. If it has this in the project, it's definitely not, take it off the table. This is an example. You can look at this online, this tool online. This is kind of an example of what you would look at if you were looking at it, if a project has co-creation of knowledge with it. Yeah.
Since you're going to be running out of that, what are the red flags?
I think the red flags would be things like GMOs and things like that. Yeah. They're all on this website though, and I think they list them. I think there's like 12 of them. Yeah, really interesting for you. Yeah. So the other objective, we might look at how do we increase the impact. So if the funding stream is going to stay really small, how can we do more with less money? So that would be a really interesting area of analysis. We're not going to do that. What I'm looking at is this closer alignment of funding mechanisms and processes with core agroecological principles. So what do we mean by that? So we can kind of think of this sort of expansion of the agroecological paradigm, or this coming into fruition as these donor organizations are kind of throwing money from the skies, from the clouds, and it's being absorbed by these agroecological movements and it's growing. We don't really see it like that. We kind of see it as something like this. So the funding practices, qualitatively how the funding works, is part and parcel of the whole system. So as goes the funding practices, so goes the system. So if you have conventional agriculture with people top-down transfer of technology approaches, we're looking at really simplified metrics for what counts as success, then you're going to get a shitty agricultural system or agri-food system. But if you're looking at agroecology, you have to accept some of these messiness, right? These multiple benefits, these emergent kind of successes of the project that aren't maybe planned out from the beginning of the project and sort of integrated into a log frame that's super rigid. We definitely want to spend much more money on co-learning and dialogues, and maybe less money on like package adoption, like we've seen in like the Green Revolution approach to development. This is very similar to like stages of development theory over here, and we're looking at something a bit more complex and non-linear in agroecology. So the funding practices actually need to reflect this, because otherwise we're just going to have a tendency here. This is kind of another way to frame it, like who makes funding decisions and by what processes of deliberation are funding decisions actually being made? Who's in the room when those decisions are made? What are the terms of the funding? How do you hold different partners accountable, including the donor themselves? What and who should be funded is an obvious one. And then who evaluates the work and what are the methods for actually evaluating whether a project was successful or not? And so this is stuff we're kind of analyzing through these interviews. So I'm going to kind of scroll through this really quickly. So just beyond sort of, this is still important. This is still a key part of this, applied agroecological research in the field, technical assistance to smallholders. But then we get into all these other things that would need to be funded for an agroecological paradigm to take hold. And this is what we want at the end of this. We want to analyze the practices. We want to anticipate the challenges that foundations are going to get into when they start to talk about, oh, we want to be more agroecological or we want to be more transformative. And then they do it and then they say, oh, that was super frustrating, or we didn't anticipate that it was going to cost this much money or take this much time. We want to anticipate that so we can plan ahead for the next round of funding and they can plan around that. And then this is an iterative process, right? So we're involved in these foundations in this research process. So we want to know how our donor organizations, and these are interviewees from 2020, how are donor organizations and funding recipients envisioning agroecological change and their own funding and changing their own funding practices to adapt to this? What is a viable opportunity? So what's working when we're making this shift? And what are the, as I just mentioned, what are the challenges? Because we want to avoid backsliding into something that's more conventional and rigid. These are interviews from 2020. This is what we've been analyzing. We also have focus groups transcripts that we're analyzing. And these interviewees included governments, philanthropic actors, NGOs, international institutions, and then we also had perspectives from civil society organizations, especially those on the ground, food movements, academia, and international institutions. And what came out of that was these two policy briefs in 2021 that you can access there online, really interesting stuff. And this is the one really that we're now turning into more of an academic piece or a deeper analysis of what these folks are saying about what needs to happen with funding. And I think I missed a slide here, but ideally, we're going to do more focus groups. We're going to revisit them after 4 years and say, okay, you said you were going to do this. Did you do it? And what worked? And what didn't work? What challenges you see? And we'll get a little publication hopefully out of that. And then the future uncertain. So just to show you a bit of the range of these interviews, some people fully admit that like we're a science, that we fund science and we can't get into all this sort of market creation or dialogues. We're really interested in science, and these are what the people giving us money to give to other people claim as our mandate. And then there are other groups that are like, we just like the organizations, we want to support them, we just are curious to see where they go. And all we want is that they can like learn from it and explain to us what they learned from their experience. So there's a broad range of sort of perspectives on this. Some of the limitations we have is they're rich conversations, but they don't actually specifically address the research questions that we have per se. There's definitely a lot of platitudes, especially people based in this country and Europe, a lot of platitudes, not a lot of brass tacks in terms of what actually works in the field. And then there's a lot of proposed ideas in the interview or thinking about we'd like to move in this direction, but we haven't heard back from them for 4 years. So that's why we're going to go back and do the focus groups. Oh, there's that image. This is these axes. You can go to this report and see these, but basically these are sort of the qualitative themes that we see in these interviews and what's working against transformative agroecology, what's taking us in the wrong direction, and what's actually moving us towards more transformative agroecology. So I'm just going to look at one of them, and it's this kind of this sort of related themes of co-governance and co-accountability. And here the basic principle is we want these donors to be accountable to food producers, their organizations, people in the territories making decisions about what the agri-food system should actually look like in their terms, not in terms created here in DC or Seattle or anywhere else. And we want co-accountability by design. We want to know what actually works with funding.
Yes, there.
Oh, okay, awesome. So here's some examples of these ways to do this, ways that the interviews have suggested are possible to do this, including advisory committees, and having a really clear funding, generating a really clear territorial vision based on the people who live there, residents of these territories, what they want their agri-food system to look like. So that is what the funding decisions are supported to. It's easier said than done. There's a ton of challenges. One of the challenges is that more money goes to the sayings than the actual doing. But then there's also all these, just when you expand these networks, it's not just like pie in the sky, like it's not Disney World, basically. You get a lot of issues with extending these networks and trying to corral people into creating change. Again, Colin kind of mentioned this kind of tension that we're both in, all three of us are kind of in. It's like we sort of sympathize with both of these, or more, probably a little bit more on that side. This is sort of the compromise we're kind of trying to get to with these, especially with these smaller foundations. It's like you have non-reformist reform. So what can these foundations do that actually limits their own power and hands power over to the people that they are quote unquote benefiting through their interventions? And so this Andre Gore's and these ideas are kind of something we're interested in framing this sort of approach. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Gonna figure out if I know how to work this out. It's the next button.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So I'm coming in after sort of Colin and Andrew have been working for a little bit, and we're still like just started. So I'll start off by explaining what multilateral development banks are. And these are financial institutions that provide financial assistance and expertise for economic and social development in countries, mostly in the global south, but there's also funding that goes even here in the global north as well. So we have a diverse range of the MDBs, and broadly, if we are to put them in a binary, we have those that are state-orientated, we call them public development institutions, and then we've got the private development institutions. The difference there is that the public development institutions deal only with government, so they give loans and grants to government only, yet the private institutions deal more with more diverse groups of financial institutions. They also lend to private sector as well. So let's start off by talking about, so this was my approach. There was a lot that has been done, as Colin and Andrew have illustrated, but to say what are the stats in terms of what is required. And this is from IFAD 2024, so to deliver the transformed food system that will deliver a healthy people, a healthy planet, and healthy economy, we're looking at an extra 300 to 350 billion US dollars per year for the next decade. So we're talking big numbers, which is one of the issues with multilateral development banks. They go on what is called the big ticket. So they are supporting, large industrial farming systems rather than the farmer who's already funding themselves, as Colin and Andrew were highlighting. And then at the bottom, for me, it was also important to understand, especially from our partners, the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition, what their focus is more livestock industrial farming, and these are some of their latest stats. So if you look at 15, and they are quite a bit of the development banks, but only 15, they did a sample of 15 development banks looking at how many of these projects that they funded, and they found that 100 plus harmful projects were funded. In 2022, we're looking at $5 billion that was invested in these heavy industrial livestock farming projects. And for me, that was alarming that none of the banks had stopped funding industrial livestock farming. So what exactly are they funding was also important to me. So these are also stats from S3F in terms of, you know, some of the bids that they've raised. So they actually take IFC, they'll take World Bank to task, they write the letters and say this particular project, you know, and they advocate for the shift to transformative agroecology. So I'll only talk about LDC, which is in Brazil, because of my friend Lucio. So this is a project that was funded for 200 million. And the funding was to purchase soy and corn, which then heads for Europe and Asia, and it heads to factory farms in Europe and Asia. So the impacts as well, the global footprint of the industrial livestock farming is quite evident. So when we talk about an eco-ecological exchange, my friend who's here always talks about it. Shashank, very evident. And we can see that these multilateral development banks, their investments are at odds with their Paris Agreement commitments. So in terms of looking at the opposite, for me, I'm excited about this, right? And how we can shift funding, or is it possible to even shift funding to an agroecologically aligned farmer, such as this woman here who I envision and sort of fantasize about. So for me, this woman is someone who has a different perspectives, different values, and they are producing probably for subsistence, and whatever they have more, they take to their farmers market. And I'm seeing this woman knowing the customers by name, being able to know that this widow has come to purchase 2 tomatoes, but probably needs 4 because they can't afford, and being able to give them the 4 that they need. So they are not profit driven, they are more in tune with their values, I guess, in their culture. So we are saying to support a socially just and ecologically sound system, MDBs are yet to address some of the following issues. In this case, how do they internalize human and social values? Because the current system does not speak to that. So and going back to the 2 that Colin and the Agroecology Coalition and Agroecology Now developed, I'm still like preliminary. So you saw with Colin's presentation, he was talking about, you know, funding that speaks to mechanisms for core governance being more aligned with agroecological systems that are transformative. For me right now, this is very glaring right at the beginning. So we've only done 2 interviews because the whole summer we're fighting for IRB. And so finally got it, and then started to engage with the partners. So I just highlighted something that's coming through from the 2 interviews that we've done. So they're really focusing on the sort of green revolution strategies. So they are funding mostly, you know, technical approaches to improve efficiency. And they also talk a lot about poverty reduction and food insecurity. So productivity to them is a key issue. So that's what they are funding. And you saw with the LDC company, I mean, a 200 million ticket project is their focus, because they are looking at efficiency and productivity, rather than focusing on improving farm and food systems that are designed to sort of internalize and integrate the social, political processes. I won't go into the other one because of time. I just wanted to share a little about the research project itself. So it's really seeking to advocate. So I don't know how it's going to look like advocating, standing in between, that person that Colin showed and the other one, like how would that all look like? So, but we really are seeking to advocate for agroecological alternatives to industrial farming and provide guidance to MDBs and how to shift and transform, talking about how to shift and transform financing for agroecology. So we are trying to use this language. It's not only about scaling up, which is the flow that Andrew spoke about, but it's about scaling out. So, reaching out to, so talking about democratic principles and participatory action and so on, and then scaling deep. Here we're talking about institutional building and so on. So that's really what the objective is. And these are some of my research questions, which I'm inviting people to contribute and critique, and because I'm also still trying to, yesterday I had a meeting with S3F, again, trying to fine tune these questions. But the first one is really, how do the current activities of MDBs enable or constrain agroecology? So to come in and say, this is what S3F has, but what is really going on? What are the motivations or the constraints in terms of the funding modalities, their mandates, and all of that? And then how can agroecology become more attractive? I don't mean to commodify agroecology, but maybe it's English being my second language, because I thought about it when I was running yesterday. Maybe I want to say, how can agroecology become more, how can it resonate more with MDBs? But that's of interest to me as well. And then what might a participatory action research process look like with MDBs in this particular case? What does co-production of knowledge in terms of shifting their funding mechanisms and methodologies towards transformative agroecology? What does that look like? And lastly, these are the phases of the project. And we're still in phase 1A. We're just sitting at 2 interviews. And then 1B, we actually ask at the end of the interview if they can identify a project or some projects that we are going to assess using the agroecology assessment tool for more evidence in terms of if those projects are agroecology aligned. And then phase 2, we will also look at non-MDB agricultural initiatives, cooperative systems. So I'll be approaching some of you. I've already spoken to Amara. I know some of the work that she's doing to get those projects as well. So that's what we have designed at the moment. These are just, I gave my reflection already, and I'm really appealing to the community. If you have any MDB points of contact, if you can reach out to me anyhow, and also to Colin and Andrew. And that is it. We're gonna invite questions.
That was great too. So zoom out one more time before we turn it over to you. So all this work thinking of, so the work on MDDs, for example, is really interesting. It was something I never thought I would find myself in. We got into this question focusing on kind of funders who are interested in agroecology and actually trying to support it and trying to transform themselves. The Banking Information Center and the Beyond Factory Farming campaign have been fighting against factory farming and MDBs funding it for decades, and have said they're always asked, like, what's the alternative? What can we support? And so they gave us, they're like, okay, what, if we want to bring agroecology to them, what does that look like? If you step back, it's like, and the question that you had in there, how can agroecology become more attractive to MDBs? Maybe how can MDBs be transformed so that agroecology can be a fit with them? Or are MDBs who are massively tied into an imperialist and neoliberal project, are they compatible with agroecology? So we're going into this in the middle with the like, what's going on here? What are these bigger systems? What does debt look like? What is the relationship between these MDPs, bees, governments, farmers, organizations and communities? What does that look like? And is there something here that can be, that's worth working on? And to see what we come up with, not assuming we're gonna get to one conclusion or the other, but having doubts about both sides. So, and then again, like all those questions about money, about debt, about the financialization of life and of agriculture and food systems is all tied up in this. And I know that lots of folks in the gun are engaging with these issues in similar ways. So I'm really interested in hearing folks talk about it for the next 15 minutes, so.